Hello and welcome to Thinking Boldly. This is the podcast series of the Concilium Institute. I'm retired Judge Julie Field, and I am here with my partner and the co-founder of the Concilium Institute, Heidi Webb. And we are very excited today to have Susan Ganz of Ganz Strategic Solutions here to talk with us today about organizational transformation. So, Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, well, we're just so excited for talking with you about the amazing work that you do. And let me just tell the world about who you are and what you do. Susan Ganz is a strategic executive and board director. She has expertise in human capital, mergers and acquisitions, and organizational transformation. She's guided Fortune 500, private equity-backed and privately held companies through periods of growth, change, and complex transactions, including leading HR and legal due diligence for acquisitions and positioning companies for successful exits. Susan is a recognized thought leader. She's been quoted in the New York Times, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. Susan currently serves on the advisory board and is the human capital squad leader of Portly AI, where she is shaping workforce readiness for success in the AI era. Susan, I know we'll have lots of questions about that as well. Susan holds a BS in clinical psychology from Tufts University and an MBA in finance and strategic management from the Wharton School. So, Susan, thank you so much for taking your time today to talk with us, and welcome to Thinking Boldly.
Much appreciated. My pleasure.
So, let's just start with what is it that you do? Organizational change, transformation. How would you describe your work in the world? I know I gave a great introduction of your background, but just condense it for those of us who are not in that business world.
So let's see if I can simplify it for everyone because it is a mouthful. I'd say at the very heart of it, Julie, is that I'm a business psychologist of sorts. Well, companies will come to me and they'll say, hey, we want to grow and scale, but here are challenges that we're facing. Or they'll say, I want to make sure that the next generation carries forward the values that we have, either as a privately held company or a family office. How do I go and do that? Or, hey, we want to introduce some new technology and processes in our company, but we're getting some resistance. We failed many times. Can you help us work through that? And that's where the psychology comes in, like similar to what the two of you do in terms of listening to your clients and hearing out what their needs are. That's similarly what I do from a business context is understand what is that vision that they have? Where are they today? And then holding their hands and providing that roadmap to go from point A to point B.
It seems to me, and I don't know if correct me if I'm wrong. This is sort of your lane, not mine. But it seems to me that sometimes businesses, particularly family businesses, have a business hierarchy that's sort of like on paper. And then there's sort of an internal hierarchy that's not necessarily the same, just personality driven or maybe role in the family driven if it's a family business. And I think it's true in families for sure. And I think that translates probably to businesses. And I'd be really curious about how you think that does or doesn't impact what you do.
It certainly does, right? There's personal dynamics and there's business dynamics. And then the lines can get easily blurred. So I've seen situations where, let's say, the husband and wife are doing their businesses, and let's say they have a patriarch or matriarch involved in one of their operating businesses. And then it gets a little interesting about how you navigate those dynamics when that patriarch or matriarch doesn't necessarily have that accountability or the same accountability. And then there's a weird dynamic that enters into that, because now you might have an adult child telling their parents what their needs are and managing that from a business context. So trying to extract the emotions from that and say, like, how would you manage any other project if it weren't a matriarch or a patriarch in the picture? What are your expectations? Okay, now you are in this situation where you do have a patriarch or a matriarch. And then it's important to still communicate those expectations, being mindful and respectful of the hierarchy. It's a dance. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, right? Because we're humans and we have emotions. So emotions are data. You have to use that data and say, okay, what is getting in my way? And then if they weren't my mother or father, how would I treat this? So it's sort of extracting and separating the issues. And it is definitely more of an art than a science.
Yeah. No, I'm sure that's where your psychological background, comes into play.
Yes.
And how that role is so important, because I think there was a time when people thought that business was business, and sort of emotions were emotions, and they were much more segregated. And I think over the sort of our generation, at least, that's become not as it's not accepted in the same way. I think people expect more of their employment situation than just sort of a traditional, hierarchical, top down sort of management led process. And, I think that I would think
Mhm.
create differences for how businesses operate and how people operate within them.
Yes, I would say a couple of things to your point, Heidi. One is that when I was in business school, never spoke about emotions, never, not
Mm.
once.
Wow.
And it wasn't until a few years later that I found myself at a women's leadership dinner, we're in Related, where there was a wonderful professor who since unfortunately passed. But she said, whoa, 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 emotions are data. And I was like, what? Say that again. Emotions are data? Yes. It's not good or it's not bad. It just is. I'm like, wow, that's so freeing and so powerful. So I've never forgotten that since. And to your point about people's expectations in the workplace today and getting the most engagement out of your workforce, I'm finding that over the last few years, it's about purpose. And so when you communicate about what are the values, what's the vision, what's the mission, and draw people in to that conversation, that seems to resonate. So that's why when I'm working with a client, one of the first things I'll ask about is, what's your bigger mission, vision, values? And from there, then you can talk about strategies and tactics. But the challenge sometimes is that the tactics are exciting and fun. They're like the bright, shiny objects. But then you have to pull the camera back. And I'm imagining that happens on your side as you're crafting the strategy is I'm sure you ask your clients, hey, what's the vision for what you want? What's the ultimate goals here, right? But they just want to know
Absolutely.
sometimes the tactics, right? And you're saying,
Mhm.
well, we need to know what's the vision, and then we'll craft the strategies, and then we'll talk about the tactics to execute on the
Mhm.
strategies. Same analogy.
Right. Right. Well, and also making sure that you help people get grounded with their vision, right?
Yes,
So that they don't lose sight of that overall vision as they're getting distracted by the tactics or the emotions or the matriarch or the patriarch or whatever it is that is getting in the way in that moment, right?
absolutely.
I mean, it is what you said. It's a dance. I think these things aren't, can't just sort of stay in your silo and expect that everyone will do the same thing and never the twain shall meet. I mean, it's a constant, checking on like the long-term vision and how we're executing on the short term and how these things are coming together and how that's feeling, how that's working. I mean, those are, I think, all parts of it. I'm curious, Susan, with I know you're involved in AI, and here you talk about ethics and values and like all the sort of what I would consider human, pieces. I don't want to say it's in stark contrast to, but it certainly begs the question, like, how do these things compete or interact, or do you see them as complementary, or do you see them as, sort of adversaries?
So I'm a big proponent of AI and humans working together. In fact, there's some research that says if you just give AI tasks to do, right? Just be productive. Go run this research for me, write this email for me. You'll only unlock about 20% productivity. And then if you have AI do more of, hey, I'm going to instruct you on how to do a task, but it's still more task oriented, you get about 200% productivity. The real unlock to get 2000% productivity is when you work with AI, humans working with AI to say, help me, work with me through this issue. And there's a back and forth, I'll call it dialogue with AI. That's where the real, I'll call it magic happens. And I know there's a lot of uncertainty with AI. And even one of the people I look up to in the AI world, he'll say, I don't know what's going to happen. And it's okay. Just work with it. Like, work with it. And he's got such a, what I call a healthy perspective, really, on it. And
Mhm.
I think that where there's a big challenge is just understanding how humans could most effectively work with AI. But it goes back to what are the ultimate goals of that organization and having a culture that is adaptable and resilient and constantly learning and figure out, okay, what is it that they want to achieve and not being so quick to say, well, we're going to lay off 10%, 5%, 7% of our workforce when there's an opportunity, a real opportunity to think through how can we reskill and upskill our workforce and redeploy them in different ways? Because certainly certain tasks are going to go away and have gone away. And there'll be other roles and opportunities that will be created in the future. But it's doing that hard work and working cross-functionally because it's not a silo. To your point before, Heidi, silos are we're over with silos. To to seriously, For companies to succeed, they really need to work cross-functionally and have a cross-functional mindset.
Yeah. I I'm curious how with the sort of, I don't know, well, sort of the fears of hallucinations or fakes, or like the way the business employs AI, but also sort of puts in, particularly in legal and in business too, sort of the guidelines and the protections for what you fear might happen or how it could be abused or misused, and how, you're seeing that implemented, especially as AI gets better, better and better in terms of what it.
Mhm.
Yes, you bring up important points about having guardrails in place. And I've attended now different talks on AI and governance and done reading about it. And what's important to know is AI governance is actually much different than just our plain corporate governance. And AI governance, to my point before about cross-functional, is more cross-functional. So it doesn't just live with the technology organization or the legal organization. It actually goes across all functions and needs to be treated that way. And at the board level, there needs to be conversation about what's escalation. Like, when do you get a call in the middle of the night that says that we need to have a conversation about what's going on because this can really be damaging? Or and understanding in the models that are used, what is it that the organization owns and what is it renting, and where's the source of
Right.
that code,
Mm.
and what's the data that's being fed in, and does that data have biases in it? And that's important conversations that need to be happening at the board level and at the leadership team level within the organization.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I guess it's fascinating to me how so many things can be replicated now through AI, appear to be quote unquote original that aren't, um, and yet not necessarily wrong or bad, but they're not owned. Like, to your point, it's like, is it yours to deploy? And where can you use something and not use something, and what's public domain and what's, not. And I think
Mhm.
it's become really hard for people to detect, and not even because they're trying to be malicious, but just because they don't see them. They've become blurred.
Yes, and that's why it's very important to open up those dialogues and not treat AI as this it's a discrete project. It's not. It's now a way of working.
Mm. It's
So
kind of
let's
everywhere. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we were having a conversation last week with someone who's involved in the co-parenting sort of sphere of, people communicating with each other through co-parenting apps. And that there's been a tone meter instituted in this so that people can adjust their language. So the question then becomes, well, is that really that person, or is that person sort of like the improved version? Like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think many people would say it's great. If it makes people communicate better, it's great. Other people might say, but it's not really them. That's not their true selves. It's not how they'd really be acting. When does it matter and when doesn't it matter? I think those are sort of fascinating questions about, like, what's humanity? What's the conscience? What's,
Mhm.
the person?
Yeah. I was recently speaking to somebody who's deep in this space and ethics. There's a big hot button for this person, and I'm on the board of the World Ethics Organization, and um, I introduced them to have this further dialogue because
Mm.
I think the more that we could put the human into AI and test before the models go out, um, that the model is not going to do something to cause harm, basically. But it takes
Mhm.
a human. So models themselves are not ethical. Like AI in and of itself is not ethical because in order to act in ethical ways, you have to have free will and you have to know the difference between right and wrong. So AI by itself doesn't. It's fed information from human beings, right? So it's recognizing that we need to instill in the humans the type of culture and expectations that we want to have out there in the world.
That's the best definition I've heard of. When people talk about sort of like the whole sphere of people having relationships with AI, or people having, there was somebody who married their AI or divorced their
Yes.
spouse, married an AI. But the idea of needing free will and knowing right from wrong, and I think there are people who would argue that an AI can deliver on the questions about ethics, right from wrong. If they have enough information gathered that they can give you sort of a diatribe on whether something is ethical. But free will is entirely different. They can't do it without prompting. Um, Although I did hear something last week. I don't know if you heard of this. This is a little bit deviating, but it was on a financial platform. And it's the first one I'd heard of that could do this. It is constantly accumulating information, all kinds of information,
Mhm.
what's going on politically, what's going on economically, and not waiting for a question. It's telling you is an update when, this stock may be impacted because there's been an embargo here, because it will assess and sort of collate the information in live time and deliver without being prompted. So, not that I think it's free will, but it is interesting that it's doing it in an unprompted way.
Yes, I've heard of all sorts of interesting technologies that are out there. One in the legal realm is there's some app where as you're doing a deposition, there's an app running in the background that can fact check the deposition
Oh,
and
wow.
reference documents that are out there and give feedback to the attorney in real time to say, well, you might want to press on this point, you might want to press on that point because the data's surfacing
Right.
this, which is, um, I was like, wow.
Yeah. Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. There went my job as a first-year associate when I was at the big law firm. That was my whole job, and and now not
Yeah.
necessary, right? I mean, all of what you're talking about is really fascinating, Susan, and I think what it speaks to is something that I think we see a lot when there is any kind of transformational change going on, whether it's in a company, in a family business, whatever it is. And, people talk about change management, but I I think what's interesting and what I'd love to hear you talk about is the need for thinking about the pace of change and operating at the speed of the people involved, and how do you do that? Um, and how do you and a second part of the question is, how do you help people adapt to the pace of change, particularly if they're not comfortable with the pace that's been set?
Yes. So there's been talk now that change is now a routine. It's becoming more of a routine because things are not standing as still as they were in past times. So I think it's um, walking people across the bridge and reorienting their mindset to say, we're living in different times now that cause us to be adaptable and where organizations are actually going to get ahead. Somebody said recently that velocity of learning is now going to be a competitive moat. Imagine that. So the speed at which you learn, an organization learns, they learn new things, now can become a competitive differentiator.
Tell me what you mean by that. Explain
Yeah.
that.
So
Let's get under that a little bit.
yes. Yeah. So what they're saying is what's going to be hard to replicate is those organizations that are infusing learning and, let's say, working with AI and learning new skill sets and capabilities. Their learning curve, like if for another competitor to come in and catch up to their learning curve, because let's say this organization has started earlier, it's going to be harder for them to catch up because they've already incorporated feedback at a faster rates than, let's say,
Mm.
the organization that's let's wait and see organizations, right? Um, so that's something that's quite interesting. But let's just talk about human beings for a moment. So human beings, our nervous system is wired to keep us safe and small from like cave people days. And so our brain doesn't know the difference between, some situations that might cause us to learn in a safer environment, then, our lives are in danger. Our brains don't know. Our brains just know, oh, something's different, danger, danger. There might be danger in there. And so when you recognize what's happening at a human level with our nervous systems and call it out and say, change is coming and here's how you can prepare. So let me give you a very concrete example. So um, when I was at a food company and we were being sold from a private equity firm to a family office, more of a strategic play because their operating businesses were in the food space, we had to reorient the workforce and prepare them for, hey, our company is going to be owned by a company overseas, so we have some cultural differences going on. We have some expectations, more of a long-term hold because it's strategic, not a financial buyer. They have different ways of working that we're going to need to learn. Um, and you know, people take pride in their work and what they're doing. And so you have to say, this is not personal. This is not against you. This is change. And we had some town halls to do some explanation, to give some background around what this new company was like. How did um, the formerly PE-backed company, what were our values? What were the new values of the company? Where were they the same? Where were they different? What were their strategic areas of focus that are probably going to get more attention in the future than in the past? So just trying to share what we knew. And if we didn't know something, we would be transparent about that as well. And we also asked for grace, right? It said, listen, we're sharing what we know today. Don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. This is what we know based on the information we know. And we will share as much as we can throughout the process. And so I think when you have those kinds of real conversations and don't brush things under the rug and listen to
Right.
people's concerns. And I also arranged for us a couple sessions around change management and what is change management and what does it mean to change. And I like to say that people are on a spectrum when it comes to change. Some people are more open arms, some people are like put on the brakes, and people are in between. So I think it's also from a leader's point of view and advisor's point of view is just recognizing that each person's in a different place and you try to meet them where they're at and really move the needle towards where it needs to go in terms of getting the ultimate goals done. for the company.
This is curious to me. Do you ever assess where people fall on these lines? Like, are there tools that you use to assess someone's sort of mental preparedness for a change like that? Like moving from a very different company to another?
So I am advising an organization currently called Portly AI. And what we do at Portly is about surfacing skill sets and capabilities. So if you're going from one function to another, or you want to move up, or even just to get what's the current state, the platform surfaces things like that, things like AI readiness, for example, and can surface a number of different skill sets and provide scoring around it that is based on not only the individual's documents, but also on um, data sources outside of the
Mhm.
individual. And it'll learn also from other individuals in the same organization. So it's a very exciting time to be able to empower people to understand who and what they're all about in the context of where they want to go.
Susan, a lot of our audience members are people that have some connection with divorce, lawyers, judges, financial professionals, therapists, and people themselves who are going through the transition of divorce. Are there lessons that you think can be applied to families that are being structured differently after the divorce?
Yes. Thank you for asking that question. That's where I'll call it emotional readiness and preparedness for a business divorce, even if it's not a contentious divorce, but it's time that the partners have agreed, let's say in theory, that they want to sell, or it's time to move on or retire or health reasons, whatever the reason is, the business is going to be changing and addressing those very real human emotions about it. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I was advising a logistics company whereby there were two partners, a younger one and an older one. And the younger one was so excited to exit. He knew what he wanted to do next. His next was to do some other business. And he was very clear about what the Monday after the sale looked like. The other partner had his identity tied up into the organization.
Oh.
And when asked, "So what are you gonna do next?" I don't want to. I don't know. I don't want to. It wasn't clear. And then what happens? Well, you start to see some behavior. He would not show up for meetings. He would not provide information that would move due diligence forward. So he was white knuckling. And we needed to really go deeper and have those conversations with him, because otherwise the deal wasn't going to get done. And the deal did stall for a bit. Ultimately, we did get it done. But I'm bringing out, when you ignore that and you try to stuff that down, it shows up. It shows up in
Sure.
different ways. Right. And then there's some people who are so tied with their business, even if they're not a founder, but they're so passionate about the business
Mhm.
that they can miss the mark. So I was advising a company that was a discount retailer, and they really didn't have anything that was, I'll call it, special about them, right? They didn't have any um, name brands, private label lines, like nothing truly special. But what was special was their real estate, because they had some really great store locations. And the marketplace was telling them, hey, you have some really great locations and bigger name brands that you would have heard of. We're going after it and say, well, take those 10 stores, those 20 stores, those 30 stores. We like those. And this CEO, to this day, I could still picture him at the table, pounding his hands. I am not selling this company piecemeal. We have a good value proposition. And that wasn't being realistic.
Mhm.
And ultimately, we wound up selling the company per piecemeal, the real estate, because that was the most valuable. So
Yeah.
how does that translate into your clientele? That translate from an advisor's perspective is to help ground people in what's realistic and what various sides are saying and what's the truth or most likely scenarios and not shying away
Mhm.
from it. And finding a way to break through and get through that. And if you're that individual who is going through a family transition, is to really be clear about what it is that you want on the other side of it,
Right.
and being true to yourself and what makes sense
Mhm.
for you. And that's where you bring your magic.
But great to hear it from a business perspective, because I think because divorce and family restructurings are so personal, that when people's sort of emotions cloud it, people almost, there are many times people are like, well, it makes sense. It makes sense that people can't make decisions because their minds are clouded. They can't move forward
Yes.
for all these reasons, which is true. We understand that emotions can allow people to not be able to sort of engage their logical brains at that point. But having the long-term vision, understanding the readiness, like all those things allow step into a different place. And it's really refreshing to hear it for me about business because, it's the same, holding on to what the dream was, what the vision was, what the business was. It's not just the real estate, it's more than that for that individual. So yeah, moving beyond that's really helpful.
Mhm.
Yes. And there are, steps that somebody can take. I've put together a transition readiness checklist that your audience
Yeah.
can get
But that would be
access
wonderful. Share
Yeah,
that.
tell us about that. Tell us what that is and what the thinking behind it is and how people can use it.
If you have a vision around what you want your legacy to be, what your ultimate outcomes are, you 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 can't just in an instant, oh, I'm going to get this. There has to be thought and planning behind it, right? So, you look at who's your leadership team and what's the bench strength behind it. And if you as an owner were taken out of it, who else is there? How can you continue?
Mhm.
And then from an operations standpoint and the workforce itself, it's what kind of skills do people have and what is the business doing to be able to scale and have the right processes in place that are communicated and able to be sustainable and scalable in
Mhm.
the organization. And then it's about having strategic alignment and communication around all of the different stakeholders, right? So going back to a few minutes ago when we were talking, like
Mhm.
even if two owners or two partners or two or more partners have disagreements on the direction for the business and ultimately they decide that they agree to disagree, how are those things handled and what kind of documentation are you having in place to go back to and refer to and say, well, I don't think that we're going to come to an agreement here. And I think that I need to have a business divorce. Well, what do your documents say around how that's handled? And then from a communication standpoint, more broadly with various stakeholders, are there regular forums like town halls to be able to communicate updates and have people be in alignment and understand what's the direction of the company and what's my role in that? And
Mhm.
then, the final is really what we were talking about, is the human parts of it, is having those Monday after the sale conversations up front. And then, in terms of running the business, how are you running it in a transparent manner with your workforce, that when you hit bumps along the way, right? Because economies have cycles. There's up cycles and down cycles, and we're having a lot of uncertainty. How do you navigate that? But with humanity and recognizing that people are in different places in this journey. And then with AI, what kinds of strategies are you putting in place with respect to thinking through how work is done on the go forward? And are you going to have this human AI optimization to get unlocked productivity? So those are the sorts of questions that I ask. And if there are more no's or I'm not sure's, that opens up a dialogue for conversation about, well, again, what is it that you want to achieve and how can we get you there? What are those challenges and roadblocks?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of direct application to what you do, with businesses and what people might want to be thinking about as they're transitioning their family after a divorce. One of the things that you shared with us is a quote that is one of your mantras, I guess, right? Is resilience is your brilliance. And I love that because I think, well, you tell me why you created that quote, and I'll tell you why I love it afterwards.
Fair enough. So to me, it's especially relevant now, given the speed at which business is operating and just the world is operating, is I find it a very empowering statement that says it's all within you. It's your resilience is your brilliance, right?
Mhm.
It's your way of, how am I going to navigate? I have the power to navigate based on what I know. There's things I can't control. There's things I can't control. One of the things that I can control is how I respond, how I show up, how, wh- what thoughts I want to have, what behaviors, right? So to me, it's really about one's own power built into that statement.
I love it, Susan, because what it really talks about, I think, is growth, in the midst of change, right? It's not just coping, it's growing. When things are changing and challenging and you're trying to sort it all out and really figuring out what's next while, as you said, keeping your eye on that North Star, that
Yeah.
what is it? What is that vision? Where do I want to end up? And navigating the way through that. So I think it's applicable to life and divorce and business and just being human.
Brings me back to
Absolutely.
my mom. I can hear her saying, over and over again so many times, change is the only constant. And, now more than,
Mhm.
oh, but it's just so true. And I think if people can adapt to it, it's just to their advantage, by so many levels. So I love that too. Great.
Well, Susan, this has been a fantastic conversation. We'll be sharing, with your permission, the Business Transition Readiness Checklist with the folks
Yes.
that are tuned in. And they can find you at Gantz, Ganz, strategicsolutions.com, as well as on LinkedIn. Frankly, I think if anybody just Googled your name, they would find a plethora of information that is thoughtful and useful and thought provoking. And I can't wait to see what's happening with Portly AI. We may have to have you back
Yes.
to see, or your avatar. We could have your avatar speaking to us if you get that far with your AI.
It's been a fun conversation. Thank you for allowing me to share the business aspects of uh, business transitions that are very applicable to your community.
Yes, thank you.